Well, welcome everybody to this Ekahau webinar series. Today we are doing a special Q&A session on troubleshooting, and you have myself, Mac, we have our sidekick Stu always with us, and a couple of guys you may have seen before. We have Mr. Keith Parsons and Mr. Peter Mackenzie. So we'll start with you, Keith. How are you today?
Great, early morning, ready to start answering your questions.
Perfect. And how about you, Peter?
Yeah, doing great. Ready for Keith to start answering your questions.
Yeah, we practice at handing off to each other. And if we really don't know the answer, we'll send it over to Stu.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't know the answer, then who do we send it to?
Then we just say it depends.
It depends. It depends.
Okay, so we have a few questions from before the webinar started. So let's maybe start there to set the tone, and maybe if you have some follow-up questions to that, we can just start there. So the first question is from Charles in Australia, sent to us a few days ago to our email, and he is working in a multi-floor factory setting where they have a lot of old access points like 802.11a APs and N APs and AC APs and AX APs and a mixture of clients, all different generations as well. These clients, they are expected to do voice over Wi-Fi, and the issues they have there is that the old clients, they seem to roam better than the new ones. The new clients, they seem to be dropping off quite frequently. They have salt and pepper the access points, new and old ones. So there is probably a consideration about cross-band roaming. So what we wanted to discuss is, are the older devices more affected than the new devices in the mixed network, mixed generation network? What are the roaming considerations? Is cross-band roaming a really bad thing? And what are the best practices to work in such difficult environment where you have a mix of at least 4 different Wi-Fi generations from both APs and clients standpoint?
I think the start of this is, once you start down the path of mixing those generations, you're going to have issues. They are backward compatible, but at each generation, the chipsets work differently, and both the transmitters on the APs and the clients have to make decisions. And one of the things you might be finding is the older 807A clients, and by the way, those are really old, you might want to talk about getting those fixed, have a very limited choices. They only support just a handful of data rates, and so they have a much simpler decision to make. So their algorithms are not complex at all, and they don't take into effect all of the newer features that come along. But they don't have to, because when they came out, they worked with that generation. They might be having trouble because the newer chipsets in your newer APs treat them differently and expect them to be acting a different way. And they also they're used to making decisions on the APs they were on, and when you change the new generation, you might want to check to see if the AA clients are staying to older APs or are they going to new APs. Your question I got a list in my head of things that I would want to go on site and try to find out. Troubleshooting is about more inquiry than it is getting to the answer.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. One of the things with generations of Wi-Fi is getting more and more complex. So the reason your older clients are probably working is because all the APs, because they're backwards compatible, support those older clients, but we don't have forward compatibility, is what I would say. So there could be a number of reasons, but for example, if on your newer APs and your newer clients are supporting something like, I don't know, 802.11k, and you're getting neighbor advertisements, well, that's only going to tell you about the APs that support it, and your newer clients will hear it, so they maybe won't find and discover the older APs that way, and therefore have trouble roaming. But that's just one of many scenarios which you could be finding.
Or the newer clients don't see the older
that's
APs.
What I'm seeing, the newer clients are not seeing.
They might not see the older APs, and then there'll be like holes in the network.
Effectively holes in the network. But there's a number of reasons that it could be. That's just one example. So it's normally within what I would class as a roaming environment I would tend to not mix AP generations.
If you're forced to, and I've done this in the past, is change, if you have a lot of APs in multiple buildings or even sections of a warehouse, make a roaming area all the same. So swap them around so that they're grouped together rather than salt and peppered, because then you're going to have little dead holes that aren't supporting a certain protocol and others are. So.
And a very simple thing you could try, depending on it's mentioned it's a factory, I think, was it, or warehouse, was it, Matt?
It was, yes.
So what do your clients need? It might be that all your clients need is 802.11a data race. That might be sufficient for everything you need. If you're just doing a bit of barcode scanning and effectively a little bit of telnet traffic going over the network every now and again, maybe you can disable the higher technologies on your new APs and make everything 802.11a. That may work for you until you can afford to upgrade.
So I would say, Peter,
all
that
the APs.
it makes sense to disable higher data rates to enforce even more capable newer clients to continue operating in a mixed environment network where you have newer and older APs.
Under certain conditions, if you don't need and require those higher data rates, and I would only say that in certain environments, but warehousing may be one of those environments where you might do that.
Okay, and that makes perfect sense. So, yeah, come on, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say, we seem to have a fan of yours, Kiki, that's seen some of your videos, because we've got a question that's come in directly for you. If we feel like we've sufficiently answered that last question, or was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think it's all right. If you guys have any more questions about the mixed environments and challenging environments, shout.
So I think they must be referring to one of the videos you've seen. I know which one they're talking about. And it says, the question here, Kiki, it says, you always mention to never mount an AP like a clock. But would this apply when using external antennas?
Well, you can put the AP any way you want when you have an external antenna. I mean, I've put APs outside of a freezer box, and it's not even in the area. So the radio and the access point and the antenna are two different things. I was specifically talking about when you put an AP that was designed and its antenna pattern is designed, let's say that like a donut underneath, and it was made to mount at the bottom of the ceiling, and that's its antenna pattern, then you don't want to put on the clock because then the antenna pattern rotates, you have a change in polarity. Now, I did a job in Poland once, that was an old Soviet block building, and the walls were concrete, reinforced concrete, and the floors were made out of wood. Weird building construction, but that's the way it was built. So we ended up mounting on the APs on the wall like a clock, because we wanted it to go through the wood floors, and it wasn't going through the concrete walls. So like all rules, there's times to break them. You just need to understand the reasoning why. The reason I say don't hang on a wall like a clock is if it was not designed for that and the environment doesn't call for it, then you're getting worse Wi-Fi. The problem is Wi-Fi works all the time. It is so extremely resilient that when you break a rule, you don't know because there's no instant penalty. You put an AP on the wall like a clock, and what it ends up doing is having a smaller area, and it changes the roaming that clients need to do, and have smaller, tighter, and they roam faster. We don't like that. We would like it to have a larger area of coverage, but it still works. So learn the rules. Feel free to break rules. We break them all the time. But if you know why it's there, it makes it much easier to explain it to your customers why you're doing it as well.
So just to add to that question, like we are sitting in a room now where the access point is mounted like a clock with internal antennas. And does that affect the performance of Wi-Fi in the very room that we are sitting in?
Just explain how just the two of you, just a meter and a half apart, are having quite a bit different experience.
True, very true.
But it works.
It does.
And it works upstairs, and it works downstairs.
Yeah.
Do we have downstairs?
If we did.
If we did, it would work.
Oh, okay. What is Wi-Fi like outside for you? Are you associated to the same access point on channel 40?
On channel 40, ooh. Let's see, I think, let me see. I'm on channel 48.
Okay, so associated to something different. We have some funny things happening probably upstairs, moving heavy furniture. Alrighty, do we have any more questions about the Wi-Fi mounting? Anyone wants to add something to it before we move to the next question?
No, people were saying my mic was quite low, so we're troubleshooting my audio during the session.
Here, use mine.
Thanks, Keith.
Your
How about-
mic is quite loud.
No, low. Couldn't
Low.
hear me, but
That's not mic, that's your voice, my friend.
maybe I need to talk a little bit louder. Okay, well, we can move on to another question here that we've got coming from Gary that says, is it wise to go ahead and quit supporting 2.4 gigahertz devices? Maybe if you want to answer this one, Peter.
Is it wise to quit support? It depends.
You can't start with that. That's our default ending.
It's a default ending. No, I think, so I'm a big believer for general carpeted corporate office spaces making the corporate network 5 gigahertz only. To find when we talk about corporate devices, smartphones, tablets, laptops that don't support 5 gigahertz, you've got to go back a long time. And those devices don't really need to be used in a corporate environment. So, and when I convince a customer to turn off 2.4 gigahertz, the amount of tickets and complaints drop like 40%, like it's noticeable. So I'm a big believer in making corporate environments 5 gigahertz only. Does that mean everything should be 5 gigahertz only? Not necessarily. It is. When we're talking about IoT, 2.4 gigahertz band is going to be used for IoT, I think, for a long time. And there is still uses for the 2.4 gig band. But if we're talking about corporate usage, even warehousing, a lot of people used to say, well, you get a lot older barcode scanners. I don't think that's true even today. That don't support 5 gigahertz. I do a lot of warehouse and manufacturing work, and most devices can be configured on the 5 gig band, even 10-year-old ones. It's very often they've got a profile fixing them on 2.4, and that needs to be changed. But they can 5 gig, and sometimes they've not got networks designed for 5 gigahertz, so that needs to change. But I'm a big believer in when it's you want critical stable performance being 5 gigahertz only. But it is uses for 2.4 still.
And there are sites where they require 2.4.
Yeah.
But I would strongly recommend splitting the SSIDs, and don't, and here's the tip, don't reuse an SSID that was a dual band SSID when you go to split, because you get clients that get confused. So when you make that switch from a dual band SSID to single band SSIDs, they must be unique and new. So no old devices remembering, well, I should have went over there and it's not there, and they get confused. So just start fresh.
I think if you're going to reuse an SSID, make a 5 gigahertz one.
Yes.
But definitely don't use it on your 2.4. I think that would be a tip, because then at least anyone who remembers it would be connected where you want them on 5 gig, not your.
And when you're doing your design, when you're in Ekahau, you can, I design in 5 gig first, and then after it's all done, I redesign by turning on only the APs that you need to get you the requirements for 2.4. And many times that might be a third. I don't think I've ever seen more than a half of the APs need to be turned on in order to meet the 2.4 requirements.
Yeah.
And there was another very good question about what we just discussed, about the crossband under single SSID, for example. Do you guys use a band steering if you want to steer clients towards 5 gigs, or do you just keep it simple?
I tell my customers a very simple thing. Apple, with their billions of dollars and $100 million worth of research, have come back and said, guys, we can't make this roaming between bands work, so please, we recommend you have 2 separate SSIDs. If they can't get their clients to roam properly, it's going to be really tough for a vendor who doesn't know how the client roaming algorithms work to do that. So all they're just trying to help in that band steering. They're helping. Some vendors have a little more aggressive approach, and sometimes that actually messes up the client roaming decisions. So I don't think I've had band steering turned on for a long time.
I agree. But separate SSIDs on different frequencies is definitely the way to go, I think.
All right. Well,
just a two quick follow up on that. get a lot of questions and say that, we talk about separate SSIDs for things like that. Would that start to also apply to like customers that are using WP3 now, using a separate SSID? What are your
it's a good question. I think that separate SSID issue, if you're then thinking about 6 gigahertz, where we're going to have WPA version 3 is going to be mandatory. That opens up lots of questions and lots of challenges, because if you were going to have a common SSID over like 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz, for example, but in 5 gigahertz, you're still trying to support all the clients that don't support WPA3, then you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have different SSIDs because you've got different security mechanisms in play.
And I don't know if we know yet, and maybe Peter, you've had a little more experience in the mechanisms that are used to find. I mean, we have so many channels in 6 gig, you can't afford to have a client go and try them all. So there's some mechanisms where you would listen on 5 gig, and hear where they are, and then move, or you hit the PSC channels. We don't really know in the enterprise space how that process will work. So I'm not even know if we can have a 6 gig only SSID, depending on the mechanisms to find it.
Absolutely. These are a lot of the questions I think that need answering. You're exactly right, Keith. If you want to start to do out-of-band scanning, then maybe you're going to have the SSID on 2 bands. But if you have the SSID on 2 bands, there's a whole bunch of other complications that are going to come in place. The other thing is the clients have to support the out-of-band scanning. And the early clients that I know which have been tested are not doing that. They're just scanning on the preferred scanning channels. And they're not, that's the only way they're discovering the channels. So again,
I don't think we know yet.
We don't know. There's a lot still to be found.
Come back next year, we'll maybe have a better answer.
We have got we've got a question here that's been upvoted quite a lot actually, and it's one about from Antonio that says, how do I handle Zoom heavy use in student dorms, high density, when I know there's ample coverage, primary and secondary and client capacity, but users are still complaining about the wireless?
Put them on wire? I mean, it's dorm room. They have so much dark copper in dorm rooms. Yeah, I mean, one, if you move them over to wire and they still have a problem, then you know for sure it's not a wireless problem, because the same problem exists on the wired component. I don't think it's a coverage or a capacity issue. There's a lot of issues with Zoom that have to do with latency and I don't know the rest. I mean, I would go on site and figure out how are the packets actually traversing the wireless to wired network, and you might have a bottleneck just in the IDF at the end of the hall.
The troubleshooting is a process. And when we go on site to do troubleshooting, we follow a methodology to identify why you're having a problem. There is it may be nothing to do with the Wi-Fi, the issues you're experiencing with Zoom, but it could be. I think it was about 2-3 weeks ago, we were troubleshooting virtually the same issue you're talking about, and discovered a firmware bug with a particular vendor's APs causing issues on Zoom calls. So that was just one example. I've seen various other issues to do with roaming and other features and configuration causing those issues, cross issues. It could be to do with the routing on the network. There could be so many issues. So you'd have to take a sort of structured approach to troubleshooting that issue and trying to work out where the problem lies.
I do have one tip you might want to take. You said university, they're in dorm rooms. I'm assuming that you have a pretty high percentage of Macintoshes. So you could easily just ask the customers when they call in and they're complaining to have them go and hold the option key down and hit the little boing, boing, boing for Wi-Fi and see what their MCS is. MCS is, I really like it as a metric because it's self-reporting and it's what that device is going to transmit. It's not what it's receiving, it's transmit MCS. And if there's having difficulty in the air, it's an airtime issue. They will have dropped frames, and then after a couple times they'll downgrade their data rate, and that will show up in the MCS index. And so if while they're having those Zoom call issues, they see a drop in their MCS, then it's a telltale sign you might have a wireless problem that you can go after the wireless side. Like you said, you might have capacity, you might have great coverage, great RSSI, but the airtime is getting congested, and MCS will help you self-diagnose if it's an airtime issue. If they all keep, during Zoom issues, they're having a high, 5, 6, 7 MCS, they probably don't have an airtime issue, it's someplace else. Maybe, it depends.
Hey, well, gents, I got one more that was in the chat in the Q&A here, and this is actually gets into that antenna design a little bit. Is the length of which a cable can be from the access point to an antenna. It is important, and there's types of cables. Can you kind of highlight on what is kind of the maximum? What is a cable length would be between an access point and an antenna? When you talk about where can I place the AP, in a closet, 3 floors away.
We got asked if we could use stories. Someone told a story about a site where they were putting antennas 150 feet away from the radios on the APs. And my first reaction was, that's never good. That's way, way too far away. And then they brought out this LMR cable that was fatter than my thumb. And it was, the amount of money they spent on the cable was horrendous. But they were old cell tower guys, and that's how they saw the world. And it did work. It wasn't the cable that wasn't causing the problem. You can get cable that has very, very low loss. And so it's not that you can't go far, it's that your cable has to match the requirement. So you do your normal calculations to say, if I put in this kind of cable with this kind of loss, is that going to affect? The problem is when you go buy external antennas today, they don't use that big fat cable. Sometimes they got little teeny cables because they're only designed to go a meter or less. And then if you move those further or you put an extension, which is crazy, and I've seen it, they just put an extender cable in between that exacerbates the problem.
It's a great answer to that question we had there. We forgot another one coming from a good friend of the show, Jeremy. And he says, what is the single most? He goes, I know there are many, but let's distill down to one. The most important aspect of a Wi-Fi design? Is it the implementation to improve client roaming behavior? Maybe assume it's like BYOD, and you cannot control a client device anyway. So I think what the question there is like, what do you do when it comes to a Wi-Fi design when you're not exactly sure about the client devices that are going to be coming into the network, and what is maybe the best way that we can design and maybe configure the network to make sure we've got the best chance for those devices to act and behave well on the Wi-Fi?
I bet I know what Peter's going to say, but I'll let him answer. And then I'm guessing we're going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I was trying to fully understand the question. What's the single most important thing? Yeah. The single most important thing is ensuring that that your users have good signal, so primary coverage and high power signal. So one of the most important things, one thing that people often do, in my opinion, wrong, is they have their APs at too low power or too far away from the users. Get your access points as close to your users as possible, and that is the single most important thing I think for good Wi-Fi, is place your access points as close to the users. You totally disappointed me. I thought I knew exactly what you were going to say. What I'll say is, it's all about gathering the requirements. And the question was, I can't gather requirements, so what should I do? You should go back and gather requirements better. That's true. Because if you don't know what your goal is, anyway will get you there. And so I've come across nearly all in the last 20 years of my career here is people don't want to give you the requirements. Many times it's actually insidious, because they're like, well, if I tell you that and you meet them, but then our requirements change, it's not your fault, it's my fault. And that's exactly why I want to know what they are up front. I need to know exactly what you want. If you say you have multiple clients, then I'll design something for multiple clients, but some of them might not work very well.
And I don't want you to complain saying, well, the customers are complaining, well, my Galaxy S3 doesn't work. Well, I never designed it for a Galaxy S3, and a Galaxy S3 has a sucky chipset in it, and it's going to have a hard time. If you want me to design for the S3, I will, but it's going to cost you more money. Those are the discussions you need to have early on. And I also agree with Peter, get your APs closer to your clients.
Yeah, if you it's a good thing, isn't it? Getting your AP clear. So I do agree with Keith. Requirements are key. Just saying I can gather requirements is sometimes a little bit like putting your head in the sand and and hoping that the big wolf isn't there.
So what happens when an ostrich puts their head in the sand? Their butt's just uncovered.
Absolutely. So it is important, and something that people often say to me, you take a university, well, we don't know, we could have any clients come in. Well, it's not true, is it? Because you do know, I'm having a mic adjustment here. You do know a lot about your clients, actually. You might think you don't know anything, but you're not going to have probably barcode scanners in the university. You're going to have tablets, phones, laptops. What types? Well, generally, people often renew their phones about every year or 2 years, most people, because that's what contracts last. So you do know roughly how old they're going to be. If you will have some wireless system, probably some wireless management system. You can see the percentage of iOS, of Android clients. So you can probably gather quite a lot of information, even when maybe the default thing is, well, we could have any type of clients coming in. Often information is there to get a feeling and a perception of what clients people will have.
And I found when they balk at answering you, turn it into money and they will give you what you want. It is possible to support an iPhone 1, but I doubt you have many iPhone 1s today. But supporting an iPhone 1 will cost more than supporting an iPhone 12 in your infrastructure costs. And if your customers know that, then they will I like using X just as a variable. And so if I tell them iPhone 12s will cost X, iPhone 1s will cost 2X, they kind of pretty soon don't want the iPhone 1s anymore.
Absolutely.
And actually 2X would be really generous. It would actually cost a lot more.
Peter, we've actually had a question come in that we were talking about earlier this week. So I think this would be a great question for you to answer. It's from Samantha, and they are saying, when doing an AP on a stick survey, can you have 2 or 3 sticks in the air at the same time? And if so, do you do this passively? And does this change the data collection per AP when you are not connected to the survey SSID?
So can you do it? Yes, you can. Is it a good idea? Yes. Let me, and I'll tell you some of the issues with it as well. But first of all, one thing I would say, and this might surprise, but I don't know, I'm going to guess at about 80% of people who do AP on a stick surveys do them wrong. Okay, let me explain why. And that is because you put an AP up on a stick, and where do? You survey, and you get to your requirement threshold, what, neg 65, and then you stop. And that tells you that I've got neg 65 up to this point, but you have no idea where you're going to get co-channel interference. You have no idea what happens beyond that point. So the problem with that is that we can't judge co-channel interference, we can't judge anything else like that, all the other metrics that we want to know. If you're going to survey all the way out to neg 85, let's say, dBm as a boundary, that's a big survey for one AP. You may be doing 2 full floors of a building. I did a building in Cardiff in the UK where it was a big atrium in the middle, and I put an AP on the 4th floor, and I literally had to survey the entire building, which took me probably about, to walk the building and all the rooms, probably took about 4 hours. And that was just to get to minus 85 everywhere. Now, if I have to do, and then was with every AP position, I'm going to be there weeks. So that's why people don't do it. So one way is I put multiple APs up and do the survey, and then I'm going to capture 3 or 4 APs while I survey that entire building. That saves a lot of time. So I think there's an advantage for that. The more APs you put up, you've got one of the advantages of doing an AP on a stick survey is we can just capture on the channel the APs on. as opposed to scanning every channel, because we know it. But obviously, if I've got multiple APs, I'm going to be scanning more channels. I'm not necessarily going to be able to walk as quick.
But
So
you can also put them all on the same channel.
You can.
Because it's easy. It's easy to separate them out afterward.
Absolutely,
by MAC address.
because you're not using. So you could just put them all on the same channel. So I'm, if you can, and you have the survey kits, I'm a big believer in putting multiple AP on a 6 and then doing one survey and getting multiple data points.
I totally support Peter on this. I agree. I didn't know if it was 80%, but
No, it's a guess.
but there's a lot of people who, if you don't walk to the edge of the co-channel inference, you don't know, and that's the hard thing to design. Designing the coverage is easy. Designing out co-channel inference is difficult, and so you can use the multiples to help you along that way, just to offset the time cost. I used to carry 4 sets all the time. It was just a standard thing.
It's quite a lot of equipment you carry, Keith. And just to put it into some perspective, like we were doing recently a AP-onistic survey for a warehouse that was almost 1 kilometer wide. To get to the edge of NEC 85, that is like a, let's say, a special value for CCI, we had to go around an entire warehouse for every single AP-onistic measurement. So it was like actually close to 12 kilometers to go around to understand the propagation from a single AP.
I don't think you need to do that for all of them,
No.
but you learn a lot, and it's also punishing to your body to do that, to realize, wait, I can barely even see the AP. I'm a half a kilometer away, and I'm still receiving co-channel inference. That's a visceral way to learn where Wi-Fi is.
It's really helpful.
And then when you just see something on the map, you're like, I had to walk that far. Oh, that means the RF goes this far. That means, and then you start thinking, oh, might be time for some directional antennas.
Exactly that.
I think now would be a great time to launch our poll question for today. So let me bring up the poll question slide so we can see what it is. And I will launch the poll. Mac, if you can do the honor of reading it for me.
Of course. So let the poll read the poll, right?
Yes.
What is your favorite Ekahau tool to use for troubleshooting Wi-Fi networks? A, Ekahau Pro. B, Ekahau Survey. C, Ekahau Analyzer. Or D, Ekahau Capture.
We have a drum roll here whilst we're letting all of the audience answer the questions, and then we'll throw it over to you guys. Peter, I think I could maybe guess which one would be your favorite.
I don't think you will.
I don't think I'll be able to
No?
guess.
No.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to end the poll now and then share the results, and then we can talk through what we see here. So we can see actually.
Disappointed.
You're disappointed. I mean, Peter, I have to be honest, I did think if you were voting, you probably would have gone for Ekahau Capture.
Same.
To be honest, if you really gave me those options, I probably would. But really, I want option E, which is all of the above. Because what do I want to troubleshoot? I need all those tools because they all troubleshoot different aspects of the RF, and that's the important thing. So if I'm troubleshooting coverage, capacity, my channels, I'm going to be using, Ekahau Survey or Pro. I'm going to be using, Analyzer to maybe get a good idea of the RF environment. I'm going to be using, and to get layer 1 spectrum analysis data. I'm going to, if it's protocol issues, I need to look at the captures there.
So it's not like you always look at the captures first, Peter.
Not always, just 90% of the time. Because the thing with packet captures, as I always say, all these other tools can answer bits of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand the protocol, what people can do is use the other tools, and then if they don't answer the question, then you go to a packet capture. If you save a packet capture and you can answer the question, then you save all those other steps.
True. How about you, Keith?
I unlike Peter, I start on the other end. I do the packet capture if I can't find it with the other things. Most of my consulting and troubleshooting is fixing the RF side, and I think a quick pass, almost a scan, that's doing a survey, but more of a validation survey without any AP on it. You just walk in and walk the place and come back and look and go, whoa, man, this is terrible co-channel interference. Well, I'm already thinking, there's coverage holes someplace. So I start with a survey to see, because it allows me to visualize where, and then if there's a problem area and it matches that, then I got a step. But the reason I don't start with capture like Peter does, I'm not as good as you are, But the capture can't tell me where unless I'm walking around. Then I have to correlate the where with the capture. And so I just start with the where first. I'm more of a visual map kind of guy. And then the details are in the capture.
I think we are the same as you, Keith, with Matt, right? We try to identify RF issues first, walk around, do a quick survey, do a quick Wi-Fi scan, identify where we have issues. But we ask people exactly what's happening, when and how, speak to people on the ground, not only to the IT. And then we start drilling down.
Absolutely, and all tools. That's why I would go for all tools, because they're all valid. And you know, I do as much survey, but to be honest, very often survey first anyway, because you need to understand the RF environment.
And also, you strike me as a person that really enjoys doing a survey, Peter.
Me, I love doing surveys. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you do it? Do you
send one of my engineers out to do it for me?
So voice control survey.
I think that because the question had the word troubleshooting in there. It wasn't design, wasn't validation, it said troubleshooting. I think for troubleshooting, the place I go first is RTFM. It just is a quick, shows all the APs from one location, how loud are they, what are they talking, whether or not they have their, I'll quickly see if you have B devices that shouldn't have B devices. So that one screen, RTFM screen, can answer a whole lot of questions.
And I think it also answers the question that is upvoted now, like with 3 votes. How will you troubleshoot or determine interference? So let's spend like a minute or 3 talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you just said you like to use the RTFM to get to see the spectrum. That way you'd obviously be able to see some interference there.
You click on the column heading for channel and go, 17 on the same channel at this one location. I probably have a problem there. I mean, you can do that before you even do the survey and look at the heat maps and can hit the channel interference button to see the visualization. Just, there's some really quick ways to do that.
So it's easy when you see the interference where you can visualize it, but what if you have some clients, that's another question from the audience, by the way, the clients that do not report back how they see the environment. How do you troubleshoot clients that they call like a black box clients, that they are connected, but you cannot go to the client and check the device sees the environment?
Now it's Peter's capture, because I can always capture any black box, and they're in their packets, they have the information that I need.
Yeah.
Maybe not all of it, but there's a whole lot.
The beauty of packet captures, you see what's really happening.
So beautiful.
And it is beautiful, and I find it beautiful anyway. But the beauty of it is you can configure a piece of equipment, and you might think you know how it's configured, you know how it should be operating. It's only when you do the packet capture you can see, is it actually doing what you've set up? Is it doing what we expect? But before you capture the packets, it's just, you assume it's doing what you think it should be doing, but you don't know.
Okay.
And a lot of vendor gear from the AP side, from the controller side, can tell you how it's talking to the client.
Yeah.
So even if the client can't report, the AP is going to say, yeah, last time you sent me, you were using this data rate at this speed, and I had X amount of retry rates on you specifically. So even if you can't,
but this will be like from the perspective of the access point vendor, right? So it will be like how the AP sees the communication coming back from a client.
At least that's better than nothing.
Of course,
Better
it is.
than nothing, definitely. So client statistics from AP vendors are getting better and better.
On that subject, then we had a question that came in about someone that's using a mixture of cloud-based controller solutions and on-prem based controller solutions. The question was not really about troubleshooting, it's more of a preference. Do you have a preference for cloud-based wireless management systems, or do you prefer on-prem cloud controller-based solutions? Is there a depends coming now? I feel like it could be.
I spend most of my time as a consultant. Many years ago, I used to sell, and I would recommend the stuff that I sold. But at least 90% of my consulting gigs are whatever you bought, or you want me to design, and you say, "Oh yeah, I want to design." Well, just one word of warning: don't do this to your designer. I had a designer. They said, "Oh, we want you to design for X APs from X vendor." And then later they call me back to fix the problem because obviously my design was terrible. And I show up and they had Y vendor with A, B, and C different APs that they picked up off of eBay, and said my design was flawed. You design to a specific AP. You don't design to a generic AP.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Peter?
Yeah, it's interesting. Do I have a preference? I think It depends what you're trying to achieve, what we're looking at, what aspect of Wi-Fi we're looking at. Can you design good working Wi-Fi with controller and cloud-based Wi-Fi? Yes, you can. And some environments, it'll be better to have something on-prem. I think my opinion's probably changed over the last few years, but I think if you talk of, I think where cloud is preferable is it's generally easier to get up and running quicker, because the controller, the management plane is there, up and running in the cloud. So I think from an ease of setup, if that's something that's important to you,
for the switch fabric.
yeah, if that's something that's important to you, I would probably.
You don't have to do all the switch.
Yeah, you don't do all that switch.
You don't have to worry about all the tunnels, all those things.
It just goes off to, when you give it internet access, it's there, and it can be configured, and you can have it all pre-configured before you even ship something. If you're there, you can have it all pre-configured before you even ship the APs to the customer. So they plug in and they.
I remember years ago,
work.
part of every vendor's presentation and for any class you took was, how does my AP find its controller? And they would go through this, hierarchy. You had to do this first, then this first, and this first. And if you can configure your own DNS, then there's a faster way.
And there's layer 3 adoption and layer 2 adoption, and you can do, and it made Wi-Fi, it's more complex.
Yeah.
And it's just got simpler. And I think you see that. I think if you look at all vendors, they're either at the cloud or they're moving that way. So I think that's where we're moving, is cloud, across the board.
And I really don't think it's a requirement either way. It works both ways.
It works both ways. Yeah.
Your designs are almost identical. It's how does your wired infrastructure need to support your wireless, and cloud-based means you have to do basically nothing to your infrastructure.
Yeah.
So pretty much you have a massive network to deploy. You go there and you're back home before lunchtime.
Why are you going?
You don't even go there.
It's like, why are you going there?
That's what I'm saying. You just ship UAPs there, they plug them in and they turn them on.
So we're not required really.
Oh, for the design stage,
Yeah,
and
for the
definitely for
design.
the troubleshooting stage.
Yeah.
But implementation that's a different.
Okay. So do we have any more questions? Would you like to add something to the architecture of Wi-Fi cloud versus on-prem? No? Okay, so we have 2 questions from the audience about how to measure walls attenuation. It's a very good topic. We have already answered that like a few weeks ago. There are multiple approaches. If you just Google Ekahau, how to measure wall attenuation, you will see a quick YouTube video there. But just to answer these 2 questions, you basically require to have like a Wi-Fi radio set like several meters away from the wall. It can't be too close to the wall because the decline in RSSI is too steep when it's too close. And then you have your Ekahau sidekick on one side of yourself, hopefully facing the Wi-Fi radio. You take the RSSI measurement on one side of the wall, facing the Wi-Fi radio. You average it out, and then you go to the other side of the wall, having sidekick on the same side, and then you average out the RSSI from behind the wall. And then when you do a basic math, you will see what is the attenuation of the wall. So that answers these questions.
Could I add something to that?
Absolutely.
So that's a very good method and a quick method of getting wall attenuation methods, and one I use. That there is inaccuracy in measuring wall attenuation measurements that way. So something I do now, and I've been doing for actually a long time, is, I will measure many walls when on site doing that, because it's quite quick and easy. But I'll also, not in necessary positions the APs are going to go, because I'm not done the design yet, I'll put some AP on the sticks up, 2 or 3, maybe 2 on the floor, that's it, and take those, so I've got a view of what this AP looks. Then when I'm entering my wall attenuation measurements into my plan, that's my starting point. Then I say, does it match my AP? If I put an AP in a place where mine was, does it match? And then I'll start tweaking the values based on the AP on the stick measurements.
That totally makes sense.
And it's a little bit of a hybrid approach. So, and I find that makes it a little bit more accurate.
So we'll pretty much do the same. So we have the Wi-Fi radio, which is typically, if we have AP on a stick on us, that's fantastic. Sometimes we don't. It can even be like a mobile hotspot, right? And yeah. So that answers the question about that.
I think I agree with both of you. I think the hybrid approach works. What I like to do inside of Ekahau is I set those walls that match what it is, and then I do a design, and then I lie to Ekahau, and I say, it wasn't a 4 dB drywall, it was a 5 or a 6. and I change the wall type once, and it changes it in the entire design. And then I look at my placement and I say, if I was wrong by 2 dB more dense, is my design still valid, or does it cause huge holes? And I found you can have a brittle design that meets the requirements exactly, but if the walls were 3s, if the walls were 5s, it falls apart. And then I leave it at 5 and I redesign to make sure it meets it with all of the walls being wrong. And now I have a robust design. And it might only be 10% more APs, but they're in different locations. So I can make a design a lot more robust to handle future changes early on in the design process by playing with the wall thickness. You can't do that by just changing the power. If you change the power on all the APs, yeah, you get bigger circles, you might cover the problems, but it doesn't fix placement, and placement's the expensive part, getting cable dropped someplace. So I'd rather have a robust design earlier than later.
And also increasing transmitting power level on the access point side, it doesn't necessarily mean that the clients will increase their transmitting power level when transmitting their... Exactly. So the take here is we need to really measure walls accurately, because it can massively affect the Wi-Fi design and placement of access points and number of access points. So be careful there.
So I just want to answer some of the questions I had, some upvotes, and remember to everyone that's still on the webinar, if you see some of the questions that are in the Q&A that you really want to have answered before we finish, make sure you upvote them and we'll try and get to them before the webinar finishes. But we have one here that says, in a warehouse, only some of their mobile scanners are having no signal issues, but there are other scanners that are fine, even mobile phones and laptops. These mobile scanners, they're all running the same firmware. But this issue is happening only in a specific area. Can I ignore the Wi-Fi signal coverage and focus on troubleshooting the client side, or should I check the signal coverage issues as well?
I'll give a story to go with that. I had a hospital that was complaining about some voice over IP, and it was random like that. And so this is just one data point. Peter can answer it a different way. I found I laid all of the devices out at the same location and found between devices, if they only have a 2, 3, 4 dB differential, I'm okay. But they had 4 devices that were more than 10 dB off. And I picked one up and one of the nurses goes, oh yeah, don't use that one. It's got a scratch on the back. It's terrible. Well, the nurses had had an experience with that, but when you lay them out, you're like, oh. And so we fixed their problem by replacing 4 devices rather than re-engineering their whole space. The way it was described in the question, it sounds like it could be just a specific client issue, but the telltale sign is, you said if it's only a special area. I've found that client devices that people check out and use, they use them in their workspace, and so it might feel like it's that.
By any chance, was that device that had a scratch been dropped before, maybe?
Wait, these are nurse devices. Of course they've been dropped. Nothing about nurses. My wife's a nurse, my sister. Anyway, just devices get dropped.
It sounds like it might well be a device issue. And maybe, just as Keith said, those devices are seeing a signal 10, 20 dB less than other devices. So, you know, you could be left with 2 choices. Do I swap the device out, or do I just put, if it's one particular area, do I put more coverage in for these weaker devices in that area? You know, we come across, again, a story I'll tell is a retail store, and they had these 2.4 gig printers, which were lousy clients. If I compared the signal they received to my laptop, it was 18 dB less. So, between 18 and 20 sometimes. So they were really per devices, but they had quite a high roaming threshold. So to roam, they needed to have a really, not just a strong primary, but strong secondary. But when they saw signals so low anyway, so we had to design a network for that device because it was a critical device. And it meant having really, really, really loud 2.4 gig everywhere, which most people, if you saw, would be like, that's a horrible high CCI environment, but it wasn't for the printers. So this is why we say design for the devices.
It wasn't for the printers.
No, it wasn't. They could have a primary and a secondary, which is what they needed. And once we fixed that and we put their other clients, which were some handheld mobile devices, TC70s, on the 5 gig, so they were no longer on a 2.4, which was a horrible environment for them. We then had their operations worked really well. So yeah, look at your clients. It might be that for those clients, they don't have enough signal in that place, and you might need to give them more signal, but never.
I think the general rule is give clients what they want.
Yes.
Or give clients what they need without asking what they want. That was the conclusion from yesterday's session, I think from some pros.
We have a really great question that kind of like leads on from that, and it's regarding about what do you do when you are working in offices that's really built up with other, let's say you're working in a large office space that's, maybe the people on the floors, then it's not the same tenant across all the floors. So you've got multiple tenants in the same building. Perhaps there's lots of atriums and you can hear lots of other access points that are not your own access points, and it's maybe causing you some problems. What is the best thing we can do here in this situation?
Move out.
Pizza.
Move out the pizza.
No,
So
pizza is in you hold a pizza party and donuts and drinks, and you ask all the IT guys in the building to come together and you talk about it as a group.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you treat them nice, if you like, I'm going to be louder than you, I'll teach you as rogues, so I'm going to blast you, then they'll blast you back. If you talk nice, they want to solve their own problems too. And so you can negotiate that. One of the easiest things is to stop using wide channels. They just, some IT guy who's working for an insurance company just is like, oh yeah, let's do this. And when you can explain to them and show them the difference, I would survey their floors with Ekahau and get them all together and show, your floor is bleeding to us, our floor is bleeding to you, what can we do to fix it? And they usually work it out.
So what you're saying is that if you get pizza to entice everyone there, then you can fix your neighbor's Wi-Fi or actually fix your Wi-Fi.
I would say in 80% of the jobs I've had where they're in multi-tenant buildings, I've fixed my customer by fixing their neighbor.
But it's always a funny conversation you have when you talk to your customer and say, oh, by the way, I need to go fix the other people's Wi-Fi. And they're like, hold on, I didn't pay for you to come here and fix their Wi-Fi. And
then you give them the parking lot thing. If you're all in the parking lot, somebody has to shovel the parking lot snow. I live in Utah, we have a lot of snow. And so if you only shoveled a couple of the spots, and neighbors pull them in, you're gonna have a fight over those. If you all just pay and clean it all at once, it gets done. So that usually hasn't been much of an issue with my customers. They're like, oh, is that what it takes? Okay.
Pizza, would you like to add anything to that?
No, not really. No.
I think it's fish and chips though for you, not pizza.
Fish and chips, yeah. But no, collaboration, going and talking to people. I find sometimes people seem to be scared about going to talking to, other people, knocking on companies' doors, but you do it. Generally, people.
Sorry, that was probably loud for people on the microphone. I can't mute myself that quick.
They want to, they want their Wi-Fi to work as well. So if you can explain it to them, I find people normally are happy to.
And that's why I survey, because once you put it up on a big screen and they can all see it, and you just focus in Ekahau on one AP, and if you want to talk about one neighbor, you say, here is your AP, and let me show you on these 4 floors where it's covering, and they're shocked. They're like, why is it doing that? And then you get to the discussion.
Such a good team. Okay, so I hope this answers that question. So we have a few more questions that are quite quick to answer. We still have like several minutes before we have to wrap up. The time flies quite quickly, right?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yep. Okay, so what is the best way to capture or read the MCS levels achieved by your wireless clients? That's one of the questions from the audience. And that's a very good question because it will vary from system to system.
I'll do it easy. Okay. I'll do the Mac and you can do the Windows. On a Mac, you hold the Option key down, hit the boing, 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 and it will tell you. Or you can use tools that'll show up, you can put in the toolbar to show it. It's available to anyone, anytime on a Mac because they love Wi-Fi.
Hold Option key and then click on the Wi-Fi icon.
Yeah, I almost feel like I could give a little live demo of that, essentially. Whilst Peter's talking about it.
Yeah, so yeah.
But I gave you the hard one. You have to do it in Windows.
So and it's an interesting question, and so that's the way to do it on Mac. On Windows, getting the MCS rate is not something that Windows natively give up, but you can get the data rate from net.sh. So you would do net in a command prompt, net.sh WLAN show interfaces. And that will show you the transmit and receive data rate, which you can, if you know what clients you've got and what spatial streams, you can often, using something like mcsindex.com, translate that to an MCS rate or at least one of 2. You can at least determine, am I using a high MCS or am I using a low from that?
Realize also it's going to change with the data rate and the spatial streams. You'll also need not just the data rate, but the spatial stream.
One thing I really want to stress though, with both the Mac and the PC and system, I think people realize is if you have your machine idle, so you're connected, but you're not pushing any data, and you look at that, the data rate in Windows, the MCS in Mac, it will nearly always show the highest possible for your connection that the client stroke AP can do. Not necessarily so what I would say is start pushing some data, and you'll often see it drop down, because what all clients do is they start at the highest, and then if they can, they do dynamic grade shifting down. So if you're not pushing data, you could get a false impression that, hey, I've got a great MCS. But the minute you push any data or browse the web, you'll see it suddenly drop. So if you want to, and this is on both Windows and Mac Rex the same, I've done lots of testing on this. If you want to see your true MCS, you need to be pushing data when you look.
Yeah. Yes.
And one good follow-up question to kind of, trying to measure and check things is, how would one measure for DFS events? I mean, that's a little more complicated, but what are you guys' thoughts on that one?
DFS events, I go to the logs from the APs or in the controller. I don't know of any other. I don't know any other way to find them. It's not something clients will report. I don't even have to see it on a client.
But that's easy when you are in a brownfield environment, right? But if you are designing for a site where you don't have existing infrastructure, how do you guys check against DFS events then?
You wait.
Yeah.
You install it, you turn all the DFS. I'm definitely one. Airports do not equal DFS. So stop thinking that. I put APs 100%. At the end of an airport runway and no DFS events at all. I've had DFS events at places that have nothing to do with airports. I don't know where the idea, I think someone thought that airports have radar and it's radar, so they link them together. But I have seen no correlation between airport and DFS. But you don't know about DFS until you know, and you won't know until you run them and so if you shut them off, they're never going to show up in your logs because they were never using the channels. And in the beginning, if I'm worried, I will check the logs daily. And then after a week or so, I'll go to weekly. And after a month or so, I go to monthly. And I figure there isn't DFS events. And then maybe you check back periodically to make sure nothing changed in the environment. If you have them, just don't use them. So,
also, your friendly sidekick can pick up radar activity if you've got that connected.
But you have to be there while it happens. The problem, I mean, I guess if you had a leave behind sidekick.
Make sure you've got plenty of pizza.
Oh, yeah.
You've got plenty of pizza. Use DFS
you can leave me behind
until the logs tell you can't, is what I would say, from a design point of view.
Do you want to maybe, Peter, spend 5 seconds saying what DFS is? Because I don't think we've touched on that, and not everyone knows what DFS is and how it can affect 5 gigahertz channel planning.
Yes, so the DFS is a regulatory requirement in many countries for some 5 gigahertz channels. It's dynamic frequency selection because a lot of the incumbents in some of the 5 gigahertz bands radar systems, there's a legal requirement for an access point to be able to detect radar, and if they see it, to move to another channel. So that's what DFS is. It's the ability to be able to detect radar and move to another channel. And it's the access point that does that, and the clients are meant to follow. They what they call in the DFS requirements, they are non-master devices, so they don't have to scan and listen for radar, but the APs do. And of course, it's very disruptive, because if your AP moves channel, it's disruptive to your clients. These mechanisms in the 802.11 standard for an access point to be able to advertise a channel change, we call it a channel switch announcement frame, so that it can say, hey, I'm moving to this channel. The problem with that is clients may hear that and move, but if an AP is moving to another DFS channel, it then has its time when it's got to scan for radar on a new channel, which is 60 seconds, so a minute before it can transmit. So you get a break in, if it moves to another DFS channel, there's going to be quite a big break in client activity. And a minute of disconnection is just way too long. So DFS is disruptive to client behavior.
But in some vendors, you can give the target move to address channel. So you can say all DFS, so you leave out of your channel plan, say channel 36, and no APs are on channel 36. And then if any DFS event happens, that AP moves to 36 because 36 isn't DFS and they have a very quick move. The problem is if you have a lot of that, you get a bunch of channels, a bunch of APs moving to 36 at the same time. You'll get congestion, but you won't have the same drops. But not all vendors support that type of technique.
Not all vendors support it, and some vendors tend to move to non-DFS channels. And I once implemented a vendor like that, and after a week, we had all the APs on the bottom 4 channels, so which causes another problem. Yeah. So it's about you've got to deploy these systems and see how they work. Look at the logs. And you might need to disable certain channels.
Okay, I think that answers the DFS question. Just a quick tip here. You need to have APs on all the DFS channels you want to monitor in order to have logs generated against the channels, DFS activity on that channels. It's not enough to just have one access point on a single DFS channel to see DFS logs across all the channels, of course. Okay, we are getting close to the end of the webinar. Do we want to ask any more questions or do we wrap it up?
Why don't we do one more question?
Okie doke.
So there's one here that says, I see more and more WLAN implementations in offices which are using a minimum data rate of 24 megabits per second. Do you think this is a good data rate to use in offices?
I think like anything in Wi-Fi, you test it. If you set it to 6 and you look at retries, average data rate, average MCS, change it to 12, look at the numbers again, change it to 24, look at the numbers again. You change it to 36 and retry rates skyrocket. You went, oh, I pushed it too hard, so you back down to 24.
So what's the number, Skif, again, that you would like to look at while?
Well, 6 is the default. You can go to 12. Mm-hmm. You could go to 18, but there's, and maybe it's not an issue anymore. We had problems, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, that a lot of clients couldn't find an 18 data rate. So I would skip 18 and go to 24. I've had sites that 36 is the sweet spot. I've had sites that 12 is the sweet spot. 24 for a lot of carpeted areas is the sweet spot. I think that's what they're referring to.
Yeah, I think what I would say is what have you designed to? Because your density of APs is going to dictate it. So I generally, in most of my designs, it's either 12 or 24 minimum data rate. On the 18 thing, there is some clients, if you look at the way the standard's written, there's that the free OFDM, what they call mandatory data rates, it's 6, 12, and 24. And it does seem to be that for client compatibility issues, having one of those as your minimum data rate seems to be better, which is why Keith was mentioning skipping 18. So I would generally go with 12 or 24. If you've got if you're doing a high density design, so you've got lots of APs and they're quite close to each other, we can probably 24 would be a good sweet spot. Yep. If your APs if it's not dense, if it's more coverage design, you're maybe going to find 12 works better.
And just wanted to add that if you go for a lower data rate, then probably that will mean that you will have less retries caused by poor wireless quality, but at the same time, your channel utilization might be higher up if you have lots of active clients in your Wi-Fi network, right?
And your management frames that are going out a whole lot are going out there too. So
because all the management frames and control frames, they are being sent using the lowest available data rate, right? So we want to hit a sweet spot between what clients can really achieve from a MCS rate versus how much time they spend talking management and control frames.
And test it. Don't test what we do. Be able to find your software, find out what the average data rate is, what the average retry rate is, change it, and it's obvious. When you've pushed it too far, it's like the thing falls apart. And your retry rate skyrocket. Just realize as you move from 6, 12 to 24 on your data rate, your average data rates are going to change because you're not allowing them to go slow, so the only ones that go will be going at the faster rate. So when you up from 6 to 12, your average data rate should climb. We like that. And then push it again, your average data rate climbs. And so that one is going to be in parallel with your change in the data rate. It's the retry rate that you want to see does it skyrocket at some point?
And test your roaming run up in your data rate as well, because you're effectively reducing your effective cell size. You're not reducing your cell size for curtain length frames, but you're making the range at which it can operate with one AP. So if you do it too low, you'll find that your roaming experience gets worse as well. So, sorry, too high.
And it's really experience, because you will, if you push it higher, you will have more roaming events, but if they don't have a problem, then we don't care.
We don't care, but just check that roaming still works.
So we had over 65 questions today, and we answered as many as we could, but I know there was some that wasn't answered, but we've put up the, the contact details for Peter and Keith here, so I'm sure they'd be more than happy to, if you reached out to them on Twitter, maybe answer a couple more if they can and stuff.
Yeah, so if they're difficult questions, the email is Peter Mackenzie.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up there today, guys. Just want to say a massive thank you to our industry experts coming on the show today, Keith and Peter. Thank you so much, Stu, for your help as well, and Mac and all of the rest of the Ekahau marketing team for helping get this special special webinar together.
Thank yourself.
Wow. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you on the next webinar in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.